Good evening and welcome to Tisky Sour. I'm Michael Walker and I am joined this evening by Aaron Bastani, co-founder of Novara Media. How are you doing?
I'm good. We were just talking before we came live on air about how when you say Tisky Sour, you sound like Christopher Walken.
Tisky Sour. If you've got to leave the gaps so you can think of something to say, but then, sometimes you just leave the gaps in odd places.
Look, if the left completely falls apart after Sanders failing to get the nomination or failing to defeat Trump, you'll have a second shot at stardom with a Christopher Walken impersonation career.
I'm sure there's a lot of money in that. Probably more money there is in that than there is in Novara. Talking of money, please go to support.novaramedia.com because this show is only possible because of your kind support. 1 hour's wage a month. We are talking about a lot of things tonight. Three main issues. We are talking about that charter flight, which was deporting people to Jamaica. Many echoes of the Windrush scandal, but the government seemingly unconcerned about what injustices they might be propagating there. We are also going to talk about the New Hampshire primaries, another win for Bernie Sanders. I spoke earlier to Micah Utrecht in Chicago about that race, so we'll go to that in the middle of the show, and then we're going to finish with some commentary on the Labour leadership race. There is the first televised debate tonight on Newsnight. So this will be the first time that many people who are Labour members but not quite as involved as you or I will see the candidates up close. I want to start with the story of these charter flights. So in 2018, after the Windrush scandal, where the government was found to have deported people who had come to Britain in the 1950s and 1960s, lived here their whole life, Britain was their home, but they didn't have formal citizenship. People were deported to Jamaica. I was about to say back to Jamaica, but of course it's not really back to Jamaica because they've lived here their whole lives. That created a scandal, because people saw these people as we do as British. They just hadn't applied for a passport at the right time, and Theresa May's hostile environment meant that you had to show all of your paperwork whenever you wanted to do an ordinary thing, like get a tenancy for housing or claim benefits or various things. So if people found out, if the agencies of the state discovered that these people did not have the correct paperwork, they would be deported. Many people thought that might create a step change in how the government approached people who'd lived in Britain for long periods of time. Apparently, it hasn't. That's because on Monday it became apparent, it's a big news story, that the government was planning a charter flight to deport 50 people to Jamaica, some of whom had lived in Britain from as young as 5. Now, the government's justification for this was saying that this was about deporting criminals, people who were British and had committed crimes here, and they called them serious crimes. And although, as we'll come to see, whether or not you consider them serious crimes, to be honest, I doubt you will see these all as serious crimes. I'm going to read a quote from a BBC report which talks to 2 people who were due to be deported on Tuesday. I should probably say, actually, so between Monday and Tuesday, there was a court case, and some people were granted a reprieve. So I think about 25 people were not deported on Tuesday because it turned out, it's a very legalistic argument, that some people who had been in one of the detention centres, if they had an O2 mobile phone, they would not have had the chance to get the legal advice to which they were entitled because of poor reception. Anyone who didn't have an O2 SIM card, or anyone who was on a different network, they were deported. You can see sort of like the real... it's so much down to chance whether or not you get to stay in Britain.
That's a good legal argument.
Well, I mean, fair play to the lawyers, but what I'm saying is it doesn't really seem like justice is being done that you get deported if you didn't have an O2 SIM card. Anyway, let's bring out who are the people involved with a sort of segment of an article from the BBC. So, father of 5, Howard Ormsby, is among those who are due to be deported on Tuesday. So this is an article from Monday. He was jailed for 18 months after he was convicted of possession with intent to supply Class A drugs, and he was released in December. So selling some drugs, is that serious an offence? We know that Boris Johnson's bought drugs. Someone was presumably selling them. I came here at the age of, this is his quote, I came here at the age of 15 with my older sister and I've been here 18 years of my life, the 32-year-old said, speaking to the BBC's Victoria Derbyshire show from a detention centre in Harmondsworth near London Heathrow. I've never tried to deny the fact I've made a mistake, but everyone has a chance to right their wrongs. I have all my family here. I have no one in Jamaica. This is someone with 5 kids here, so those kids will be left, 5 kids will be less fatherless, as this person is sent back somewhere he hasn't lived for 18 years, he doesn't have any connections to anymore. He said he believed that if he is sent to Jamaica, he would be killed because of gang violence there. We're going to look at another video later on which shows, the real risks that people do face when they get deported to Jamaica. They also speak to someone called Tajay Thompson. He is also facing deportation to Jamaica. He served this is from Monday, he served half of a 15-month sentence in 2015 after he was convicted of possessing Class A drugs with intent to supply at 17. This is someone who dealt some drugs when he was 17. He's now 23. This is a quote from him, I feel like I was born here. Jamaica is not my country, Mr. Thompson said, adding that he had no links to the Caribbean nation, which he had only visited twice since coming to the UK aged 5. It's not like I'm a racist or a murderer. I've made a mistake when I was 17 and it's now going to affect my whole life. The 23-year-old who is living in South London added that he was groomed into a gang as a teenager. So these are people who've lived here since they were 5, no connections to people in Jamaica. They've got British accents. If you meet these people, you think they're British. And when they go back to Jamaica also, people know that they've lived in Britain most of their life because of their accent. And as we'll see, that causes people certain problems when they're living there. We'll look at the government response in a moment, which was callous, I suppose, to say the least. But first of all, I want to show an interview with someone called Chevron Brown. So this was on Victoria Live this morning. And this was someone who was deported, in a previous round of deportations by the British government. Brown was deported from the UK to Jamaica last year after serving time in prison for dangerous driving. Dangerous driving. No, you could say that's a serious offence, and that someone could get, someone can get harmed if you drive dangerously. But that's not someone who it's unsafe to have in the country. Let's go to that video and we'll talk about it afterwards.
My life is a complete mess right now. Like I don't know what I'm gonna actually do right now because I'm actually labelled a murderer and a drug trafficker and a rapist. So like, when I walk around in the street, I just get people looking at me because I look different, I speak different, and straight away if I go anywhere and ask for a job, my accent gives it away that I'm British. They're gonna ask whether I've been deported, and it just leaves on certain questions. It makes me uncomfortable my day to day.
Sure. I mean, I've got a government statement here. They put 17 people on that flight yesterday, 25 others were able to get off because of this last-minute legal challenge. Quote, the offences which these people were responsible for include 1 manslaughter, 1 firearms offence, 7 violent offences, 2 which are in the category of rape or sexual offences, and 14 drugs offences. Adding, we make no apology whatsoever for seeking to remove serious foreign national offenders. Do you think you are a serious foreign national offender?
No, I don't think I'm a serious offender. I'm not even a repeated offender. Like, I committed 1 crime, got 1 sentence, and I haven't been in trouble ever since. So when they use a drug dealer, a murderer, and a trafficker as a way of describing my character, it's completely wrong.
I mean, what's really grim there is you see, well, one, the pain that it causes when you deport someone to a country that they don't feel is their home, but 2, the fact that because the government justify these deportations by saying these are all violent, dangerous criminals, then when people return to, well, I don't mean to say return, when people are sent to somewhere like Jamaica, then there is stigma around them because people assume because they've got a British accent and because they've been deported, they must be a violent criminal. And that means they're treated as violent criminals when they get there. And this is all government propaganda, which has misled people about the nature of who is being deported, as the BBC have confirmed. That was someone who had committed traffic offences, and he's sent to Jamaica with this stigma hanging over his head that because he's been deported, he must be a violent criminal. And you can see that's a reasonable inference to make because obviously it's common sense. If someone has been deported from a country where they've lived all their life, they must have done something really, really horrific. And that's what people assume. And that means that this person gets completely stigmatized, isolated. Many people attacked. Many people worried they're going to get killed. And that is because the government has just cast these people as something which they are not. I mean, some of the people who are being deported are violent criminals, but it's very much like what Donald Trump, like Donald Trump's campaign where he said, some of them are rapists about Mexicans. I mean, if you take any group of people, some of them are going to be rapists, right? So it's not false. Any group of people, some of them are racist. But if you say Mexicans, they're racist, they're rapists, then obviously what you're doing is you're casting all Mexicans as rapists, and that's what the government here are doing by saying these are all people who've committed manslaughter, rape, and it's trying to get you to associate anyone, no matter how minor their crime has been, with a dangerous, violent criminal. Aaron, one thing you wanted to talk about is how, this idea of the government misleading people about the nature of crimes and exaggerating the nature of crimes by people of colour is not something which is purely limited to cases like this.
I did, but I was actually going to add one more thing, which is I did community service for violent disorder on a protest. Violent disorder can get you a maximum 5-year term. I didn't serve a custodial sentence. If I was one of these people in a protest, highly politicised charge. It was initially brought in to deal with football firms and the miners' strike in the mid-1980s by the Thatcher government. The charge of violent disorder, I would have been sent back there. Now, what was interesting was, that's fine. You do the crime, you do the time fund. I did the community service. I was in a charity shop in South London. What I found really interesting was, and that is a purportedly violent crime. A lot of the people I was the only white person, right? I mean, there was maybe one or two actual white kids. I'm mixed race. I was one of the whitest people there. All black people, all black. And you get talking to people and some of the kids, what have they done? Yeah, maybe assault, handling stolen goods, whatever. But then you get talking to others and it's driving offences. And there were lots of people I met with driving offences, like loads. All black people with driving offences, often first generation, West African or whatever. And I was like, this is really, really, really weird. I'm not meeting any white people doing community service for driving offences. And so that was quite illustrative for me. It really just brought home how racist the criminal justice system is in this country. We all know that. It's one thing to comprehend it. It's another thing to apprehend it, to see it firsthand. Just absurd. But the point you were leading into is about, that the racialization, the representation, particularly of young black men in public life. And I just want to bring to mind the example of Mark Duggan. Now, people know Mark Duggan because, of course, he was killed lawfully, according to the CPS, according to a jury. In 2011, it catalysed English riots, London riots, whatever you want to call them, 2011 riots. And he was described in subsequent press releases as one of the most dangerous criminals in Europe. The quote, I think you can maybe see it on the screen now. Mark Duggan is among Europe's most feared and violent criminals. This is on the BBC. Right, and this is about evidence that was submitted to a jury, but this is as much about public consumption as what was going to a jury. Now, if you ask the average person out there, what did Mark Duggan do? Because obviously he was shot, he had a gun. Turns out, actually, no witnesses saw him with a gun. No witnesses. There was a gun that was found nearby, but it wasn't on him. It was about 30 meters away. Had he left it there, had he dropped it, whatever, when he was shot, he wasn't holding a gun, even though the testimony of the police officer who did shoot him said he did have a gun. And it's completely odds, like I say, with what everybody said. Now, if you were to ask the average person in the UK, Mark Duggan, you know the name. Yeah, sounds familiar. What did he do? Oh, he was a serious criminal. Would you like to know the criminal charges that he was guilty of, Michael? His criminal record. Would you like to know?
Yep, go for it.
He had convictions for cannabis possession. Give me a break. Everybody has smoked cannabis. I don't even like cannabis. I've never bought it.
You can't become a leader of a major political party without admitting you smoked cannabis, because otherwise people think you're square.
I mean, I'm more of a stimulants person, but everybody has possessed cannabis at some point. And I don't take stimulative drugs, by the way. I refer more to caffeine and stuff, but generally I don't like that stuff. But anybody could have been done for possession of cannabis. Handling stolen goods. Again, could be anybody handling stolen goods. And cautioned for public disorder. Now, how is somebody who's been done for possession of cannabis, possession of stolen goods, handling stolen goods, and a caution for public disorder, which is basically getting Larry in the street after a few drinks, How is that one of the most feared criminals in Europe? I'll tell you why. It's because the Metropolitan Police Service has a public relations operation which is massive. And you get the intersection of racist criminal justice policies, a completely underfunded legal apparatus for people without money, and basically a journalistic fourth estate which is on life support. And these public relations just define the narrative. Now more than ever. The spin comes from the top now more than ever. And so we're going to look at these pictures of Mark Duggan, if we can get those pictures up. And I mean, I think this is the quintessence of what we're talking about here. And this sums up how minorities are represented in the media. So I think there's several pictures. We can bring them one at a time. And you can see this is a guy that's commemorating, a lost relative, flowers by a grave. Then he's holding a heart. Another picture, he's holding a baby. But pretty much in all the media representations of him, these were all cropped out. Now, I'm not saying, this is everyday racism, yada, yada, yada. It's actually far worse than that. This is about misrepresenting somebody as part of a broader media strategy funded by the taxpayer by an organisation which has a budget, the public relations team of the Metropolitan Police Service, which has a massive, massive budget. It might as well be a media outlet, right? This is, in a word, propaganda. And that's why, on the one hand, you get horrific racist stereotypes of black men in particular reproduced. That's why you get actually public consent to quite racist outcomes like what we're seeing with this, Windrush Mark II stuff right now. And thirdly, this is why the governments, why the Tories think they've got carte blanche. They think they can just do what they like because these people haven't really got recourse to good lawyers. Though it sounds like in the case of the guys with the O2 phones, they did. That's pretty excellent stuff from their legal representatives. But between the media, between the public relations, and between public sentiment, which has been massively, evacuated of sort of ethical kind of understanding of these issues over the last couple of decades. That's not accidental. That's not because British people are quote unquote racist. Maybe they are, but this is actually about a very intentional, purposeful, decades-long campaign about representing black men in metropolitan areas in certain ways.
So a counter to that, you included, critiques of the BBC. A counter to that would be to say that I started the show with stories about people who were about to be or had been deported, which was shown on a BBC programme, the Victoria Derbyshire show. But guess what? The Victoria Derbyshire show has just been cancelled, right? So the only elements of the BBC which were shedding light on the human cost of government policies are being defunded and cancelled, so that there is, so that there will be no pressure on Dominic Cummings and Boris Johnson when they, walk all over people's rights for headlines that will be positive for them in the billionaire press. I mean, there is also to be very cynical about this, a worry that this is not just the government not caring about public opinion, or not caring about, I suppose, objections to these sorts of policies, but actively thinking that deporting people who they can, portray as violent criminals is a way for them to get re-elected or to get re-elected in 5 years' time, I suppose, or to distract from whatever else they're planning to do. And I think some slight evidence that this might be what's going on is a Number 10 briefing after the deportations, where they were incredibly angry that anyone was upset that they deported people who'd lived here their whole lives. And they said that any criticism was based from a Westminster bubble. So the spokesperson for the government said certain parts of Westminster still haven't learned the lessons of the 2019 election. So they're there saying, this is any criticism of deportations, that's a liberal elite against the people. Again, you're trying to overturn an election result. 2019 was a mandate for xenophobia and kicking out people of colour if they'd committed even the most minor crime. And anyone who cares about due process, they are undemocratic, standing against the people, and they should shut up before we defund their programme.
But how can you call working class black people, like I say, primarily men, but I talked about, for instance, it was actually, I met a few older women who were doing community service on the basis of speeding offences. How can you call these people part of the metropolitan elite? I mean, it's utter madness.
They're saying that people complaining are...
No, I know, but it's a salient, racialisation. There's a reason why minorities don't vote Tory, right? And they are still part of the electorate. Okay, for now, they're not going to determine elections. In 10, 20 years, they are. It's been a big problem for the Republicans until Trump. I suppose that's the bet that's being made by the Tories. If we're racist enough, it actually, this is still a majority white country. It's, a little bit of racism probably isn't enough to get you over the top. David Cameron before 2015, the Tories then. Lots of racism, yeah. Electoral gold dust.
We're going to move on to New Hampshire and Bernie Sanders. First of all, you're watching Tisky Sao, you're watching Novara Media. As you know, this show and organisation is only possible because you guys fund it. We aren't funded by billionaires. We aren't funded by the government, which means that Dominic Cummings can't threaten to cut anything if we're remotely critical or give a voice to people who might not like what they're doing.
Can I say that's a really important point, actually? Because people, we'll be talking about the defence of the BBC, left defence of the BBC over the coming years, months. But when Donald Trump says to the New York Times, failing New York Times, they've got 5.2 million subscribers. They can say, you can say what the hell you like. We don't care. We're fine. When Boris Johnson or Dominic Cummings says failing BBC, that's a big problem for people who care about investigative reporting, original news gathering in this country.
Because that's precisely what they're cutting. Right?
That's exactly what they want to get rid of, precisely. It's about using the BBC just to amplify the rigged billionaire-owned print press. That's all they want the BBC to be.
Okay, New Hampshire. Yesterday was the New Hampshire Democratic primary. This matters, again, like Iowa, because of momentum. It's the second primary. Unlike in Iowa, the votes were counted in a timely fashion this time. And like in Iowa, Bernie won. This time around, he won. They counted it just in terms of the popular vote instead of these weird state delegate equivalents like they did in Iowa. This one seems much more rational. We can get those results up now. Bernie Sanders got 25.7%. Pete Buttigieg, 24.4%. Klobuchar, 19.8%. Warren, 9.2%. And Biden in fifth place with 8.4%. Biden, of course, came in fourth place in Iowa, so he's having a terrible campaign. He was supposed to be the front runner. We're going to look quickly at Bernie Sanders' victory speech.
Tonight, I want to thank the people of New Hampshire for this great victory, thank our volunteers, and urge all Americans to join our effort to transform this country at BernieSanders.com.
Now, me and Aaron will talk about this result in a moment, but first of all, I spoke earlier to Micah Utrecht, who is managing editor at Jacobin and author of the forthcoming Bigger Than Bernie, How We Go from the Sanders Campaign to Democratic Socialism, which is co-written by Megan Day, a friend of the show, and published by Verso. I'm sure we'll have a long show about that book soon. But I spoke to him in Chicago earlier. I started by asking that even though Bernie Sanders had won in Iowa and New Hampshire, whether we should be worried about his vote share. So in 2016, Bernie got 60% in New Hampshire. That was against, he only had one opponent, Hillary Clinton. This time around, he's down to 26%. At the same time, Buttigieg and Klobuchar's combined vote share hit 45%, so quite a lot more than what Bernie got individually. And so, that's got many people asking whether the combined strength of the centrist candidates taken together could cause problems for Bernie down the line when the centrists settle on who is going to be the main opposition to Bernie Sanders.
Well, it's hard to really assess what's going to cause problems for Bernie down the line and what's not, given that the field is so much different than it was in 2016. You have far more candidates who are in the race at this point than you did in 2016, obviously. And the way that many of the candidates are talked about is as if, okay, if Warren loses or if Warren drops out, then all that percentage of her votes are going to go to Bernie. And if Biden drops out, all less than 10%, all 9% of his votes are going to go to whatever centrist candidate ends up surviving. But I don't think that the polls show that is how voters are thinking at this point. At one point we were seeing polls that showed that Bernie was the number 2 choice of a lot of Biden voters. So the polls are just too all over the place, and the field is way too different from what it was in 2016 to really extrapolate from those numbers and say that this portends poorly for Bernie going forward. I think the top line message to take away from this is that Bernie has won 2 caucuses the 2 first states in a row and is well positioned to continue winning in a lot of states, and is even seeing numbers rise in places like South Carolina, where it was assumed for a long time that he wouldn't win, and is certainly positioned to clean up really well on Super Tuesday. So the numbers are overall really trending in Bernie's favor, especially going out of New Hampshire.
And Elizabeth Warren came fourth. She only got 9% of the vote and no delegates. That's after coming third, I think, in Iowa. Is this the end of her race? Is this the end of her campaign?
The numbers were pretty shocking on Warren. Third in Iowa, as you mentioned, but the fourth in New Hampshire especially was surprising to me. And I was seeing numbers from exit polls that were showing numbers like she was doing in the single digits, pulling single digits among, for example, white college-educated women, which was supposed to be her strongest base. That's who I assumed that she was always, that was the key demographic of her campaign support. We can debate whether or not she should be dropping out. I don't think she is planning on it anytime soon. What was strange last night was watching her speech where she was seemingly, to me, lecturing the quote-unquote divisive rhetoric that we've seen in the campaign so far, what felt to me like a sort of dog whistle toward anti-Bernie bro stuff. Very bizarre to me that she would be taking that line, just like it was bizarre that she pulled out this attack on Bernie saying that he's the secret sexist who believes that a woman couldn't be president. And it seems like she's continually putting this message out there, like indicating that she's not going to be lining up behind Bernie Sanders anytime soon. I hope that's not the case as somebody who wants to see Bernie become the nominee, but there's so much of that message coming from her. And if that's the case, then it makes it less likely that she's going to drop out anytime soon because she wants to continue playing that role as a kind of counterbalance to Bernie as he continues to be successful in the primaries.
And Warren came third and fourth in the two contests so far. Biden came fourth and fifth. He was supposed to be the favorite. Is his candidature over?
It sure looks like it. If you were watching last night, it was very bizarre because you're seeing all the footage from all of these New Hampshire parties from literally every candidate, Klobuchar, Bernie, Warren. And then you go to Biden and he's in South Carolina and you're like, did Joe get lost? Did the staff not keep tabs on him and he wandered off in South Carolina? How did he end up here? I mean, it was so bizarre. He was almost acting as if there wasn't a primary happening in New Hampshire and he's in South Carolina and he's obviously staked his entire strategy to this point into winning South Carolina, which is the fourth primary. He's essentially, he will be in Nevada, I think, too, but he said that he's staking his candidacy basically on strong black support in South Carolina. But even among black voters, who should just make sure folks are aware, are a variegated demographic group. You can't really just speak of black voters. Bernie Sanders is cleaning up among young black voters, for example. But even among black voters, if we pretend they're a monolithic group, his support is tanking among black voters in South Carolina and around the country. He previously held a majority of black support in South Carolina, and now the last numbers that I saw were that he's somewhere in the 20s. So it seems like it's over, but again, I think you're not going to see Joe, go quietly into the good night. I think he's going to continue. Continue losing, but stay in the race. But I think everybody, whether you're a socialist like me or you're a centrist or whatever, is pretty shocked that he has performed so poorly. Everyone expected him to be the front runner. Everyone was talking about him as the front runner, and yet here we are with him just doing absolutely terribly in these initial states, not promising for somebody who certainly had more name recognition than any other candidate up until this point, and who was literally the vice president of the United States for 8 years.
That was Micah Utrecht speaking to us from Chicago. He's managing editor at Jacobin magazine and author with Megan Day of the forthcoming Bigger Than Bernie. And we finished talking about Biden. The Joe Biden candidacy is, quite phenomenal. I suppose we've seen many people who were the favorite, sort of tank, reminds you of Jeb Bush, maybe Jess Phillips. But in the the thing about Biden is how long he's been doing this, right? So in the 32 years that Biden has been running in presidential primaries, he's never come higher than fourth in any state. And this was the guy that everyone was saying, he's the electable one. He's the guy to beat Trump. He's run in 1988, 2008, and now 2020. Never got higher than fourth. What's your take on Biden, Aaron? Surprised?
I mean, it talks about the whole electability thing. I mean, look, electability is the thing. You know, Barack Obama was a very electable politician. He's a very talented politician. I'm not saying, you know, some politician, anybody can be elected. It's a really tough gig, right? But Joe Biden is like the personification. I mean, you mentioned some other names, Jess Phillips, Jeb Bush. At least Jeb Bush was like the Republican frontrunner for a few months into the primaries. And Trump kind of got momentum because it was a split field. You had Marco Rubio, you had a bunch of other people.
The same as because Biden was the front runner.
Yeah, but
Jeb Bush was the front runner.
Biden's getting 8%. I don't think Jeb Bush was getting 8% in the second primary. I mean, maybe we can look. I think the wheels came off for Jeb Bush a little bit later. You know, Biden's come what? He came third in Iowa?
Biden came fourth in Iowa and fifth in New Hampshire.
I mean, that's crazy for the allegedly sort of electable candidate. And we were just talking about it sort of while there was that clip. I guess in his defense, I guess he never thought he'd run. I mean, the plan was that Hillary would run in 2016. He never thought he'd have to run for this position. And it makes you wonder, the story that was out a week ago, 10 days ago, about John Kerry potentially being a latecomer. John Kerry was basically Joe Biden in 2004. He wasn't a particularly good politician who lost to George W. Bush when the latter won his second term. It makes you think that was probably true. A lot of people were looking at the internal polling going, wow, Biden's going to come fifth. And it's a 5-horse race. You know, you're not including people like Andrew Yang. So
who's dropped out? Andrew Yang's dropped out now.
And this is before Bloomberg's in the race. So yeah, Biden is dead and buried. You expected that to happen, but this quickly? Probably not.
It does make you kind of optimistic in a way about the electorate, in the sense that, you know, that Biden's whole strength was supposed to be the fact that so many people had lifted him up. You know, he was associated with Obama. He was famous. People recognized his name. But then the moment people saw him, they were like, actually, this guy's a joke. He's an idiot. You know, so it's like you can't. It's the same with Jess Phillips, right? You can't trick people into liking a politician. If they're that shit, no one's going to vote for them.
His thing was saying, "Don't vote for me." That was his thing. That was his thing. People go, I don't agree with this, and this. They didn't even say, I'm not going to vote for you. And he was like, you know what? Don't vote for me. And
people listened.
That was like 20, 30 times he said this. Like, this is a really brave strategy. You know, is it any surprise he came fourth or fifth? One of the sort of most clippable moments was him explicitly instructing people not to vote for him.
McGlispin with a £5 super chat says, Bernie's victories in Nevada and South Carolina will be stronger because his strength is the minority vote. Buttigieg is done. The Nevada primary is a week on Saturday, and the South Carolina primary is the Saturday after that. I mean, it's correct, that comment. The two states so far have been fairly white states, Nevada and South Carolina, much more diverse. It was supposed to be Biden who was the competitive candidate among older black voters, but I mean, because he's collapsed. I mean, many people thought that was partly because they saw him as the most electable person because they were, you know, desperate for someone to beat Donald Trump and the association with Obama. But I think a lot of that might be falling away.
I still think he's okay-ish amongst older black voters. I think it's amongst the young that Sanders has really gobbled up votes. This is why he's staying in the race, because they're saying, this is what sort of establishment Democrats are saying in the media in the US on MSNBC or whatever. Let's wait till we have 2 or 3 of these states because actually his vote may be holding up amongst African Americans. I mean, it's clearly not. You know, he's kind of losing. He's losing credibility, funding, media allies, legitimacy, everything by the day. I mean, it's a car crash.
And then, as you said, the big question now is Mike Bloomberg. So it's insane that they're now considering that he is going to be the centrist Democratic candidate. He's worth £61 billion.
Dollars,
and he's
no?
Sorry,
Dollars or pounds?
$61 billion.
Yeah.
He's already spent $350 million on ads in the campaign. He's sort of he's going hard on Super Tuesdays. That's when a third of the delegates are up. Will be voted upon because so many of the big states have their primaries then. That's on the 3rd of March. He's been, you know, filling the airwaves in those states with adverts. The amount of money he can spend in this contest is basically unlimited. But this is a guy who was a Republican mayor of New York, and he endorsed George W. Bush in his second term in 2004 after the Iraq War. You know, this guy he's just Bernie's an independent. Mike Bloomberg is a Republican. So it's just like the depth of your, like, the crisis in your own competence, in your own politics. It's sort of like you get beaten by Donald Trump once, and then you're like, fuck it, let's just stand a Republican. Let's just try and beat the Republican Party with a Republican. But then it's just like, let's stop bothering. Let's stop doing politics.
Who had a really authoritarian record as mayor of New York. A really racist, authoritarian record as mayor of New York. You know, Hillary Clinton, whatever other failings she had in 2016, she managed to get a significant chunk of the African-American vote, the Latino vote, not as much as Obama. But whoever tries to defeat Trump this time around is going to have to do even better. Do you seriously think Michael Bloomberg's going to be able to do that? Or do you seriously think Michael Bloomberg's going to be able to win back Rust Belt American voters in Wisconsin, in Pennsylvania, you know, laid off workers in the automotive industry or whatever, or people in the Appalachian Mountains, coal country? Do you really think a guy worth $61 billion, Republican mayor, I mean, I don't, from whatever angle you look at it, whether it's sort of young, ethnic minorities, whether it's older, socially conservative voters, Mike Bloomberg makes 0 sense. I mean, this is an act of utter desperation. Somebody was talking about it, maybe it was Young Turks, maybe it was MSNBC, and they were saying that basically his polling was going up like 3% every $150 million he spent. So presumably the presumption is, well, if he spends like $2 billion, he'll be the leading candidate. But that's just opinion polls. He still has to have a canvassing operation, you know, what they call a field operation in the United States.
Apparently, I think he's paying people for his field operation.
No, I know, but it's been built from scratch, right? Sanders has been planning it for 4 years, Biden for 4 years, you know, but this is like...
You can do things quickly when you're worth $60 billion.
That's true, you can. But I mean, can he do it in time? I mean, maybe. He's clearly, it seems to me it's the three-horse race between him, you know, Buttigieg and Sanders.
Well, even what the Liberal commentators seem to be, you know, people like Nate Silver on 538.com, who was, you know, never a fan of Bernie Sanders. I mean, they're saying that they're pretty confident that Bernie Sanders is going to come out of these primaries as the winner. But the issue is whether he wins an outright majority of delegates or whether you have a contested convention. And if there is if you win an outright majority of the delegates at the Democratic National Convention, obviously you become the presidential candidate. If you don't get to that majority, then there's a second vote. The superdelegates come into play, and people who were committed to other candidates come into play. And that's when you might get the Democratic establishment rallying around the anyone but Bernie candidate.
Not might, they will.
They will.
If Bernie doesn't win a majority, I think there's a very real chance of that happening. If he wins just the plurality of the delegates.
And now what we're seeing basically is a competition between the centrists as to who's going to be the anyone but Bernie candidate, who the nomination will get stolen from. Who, when the nomination gets stolen from Bernie Sanders, will the baton be passed to? Great. We are going to move on to talk about a contest closer to home. Slightly less exciting, but I suppose in a way more. Well, we've got more to do with it, I suppose. The Labour leadership election tonight will be the first televised Labour leadership debate as the four candidates go up against each other in the Newsnight hustings. This is kind of a big deal because up to now, you know, it's only been the official Labour Party hustings, which are streamed on YouTube. Not that many people watch them. There are 600,000 members of the Labour Party, 600,000 people who get to vote in this contest. Not many of them watch the Labour Party YouTube channel.
More.
Is it more? because of the affiliated members
Registered
and stuff.
supporters. Apparently it's close to 800,000.
Wow, that's
a lot of people.
That's big. And so these are people whose relationship to the race will be far more via what goes out on mainstream television than what goes out by any social media channel, or you know, unfortunately, it's more significant than what goes out on Novara Media in terms of determining how this race will finish. So that'll be a big deal. We'll obviously talk about how it went down in future shows. What we're going to talk about today is a couple of issues which have dominated internal Labour debates over the last couple of days. So those are trans rights and Keir Starmer's 10 pledges. We'll talk about those in turn. In terms of trans rights, a newly formed group, Labour Campaign for Trans Rights, launched this week calling on leadership and deputy leadership candidates to sign up to 12 pledges. We're going to bring up some of those now. We're not going to read all 12, but you can obviously go and look these up on Twitter. They asked that all candidates, the first pledge is accept the material reality that trans people are oppressed and discriminated against in British society, facing a rising risk of hate crime and difficulty accessing public services, healthcare, housing and employment. Very uncontroversial. Believe that trans liberation must be an objective of the Labour Party. Very uncontroversial. Number 3, this is where some people in the media and some activists within the Labour Party are getting annoyed. Commit to respecting trans people as their self-declared gender and to ensure that the Labour Party is an inclusive environment for trans people. I mean, I think that should be relatively uncontroversial, but for some it's not. And then the ones that have really got up, or really annoyed some people, who are now organising along with the hashtag #ExpelMe, because of point number 9, which is to organise and fight against transphobic organisations such as Women's Place UK, LGB Alliance, and other trans exclusionist hate groups. And number 10, support the expulsion from the Labour Party of those who express bigoted transphobic views. This pledge list has been supported by Rebecca Long-Bailey. We might be able to get her tweet up now. Also by Angela Rayner and Lisa Nandy, who, I mean, to be honest, Lisa Nandy didn't say I support these pledges, but she sort of quote tweeted it with a supportive statement. As I said, this has prompted a backlash from trans exclusionary radical feminists who are organising on the hashtag #ExpelMe. They presumably think that they would be considered transphobic if these pledges are accepted, and thus they would be deemed to be worthy of expulsion. It's a difficult topic, this one. I mean, the context really, and why I'm sympathetic to the demands, is that there is a movement that exists at the moment of people don't like to be. People have sort of said that a TERF is a slur, but I mean it means trans exclusionary radical feminist, which to me seems like a kind of apt description for the movement that currently exists on parts of the left, although they get more of a platform in places like The Spectator or The Sunday Times than they do in any outlet like Novara Media. And what these people believe is that trans rights reinforce, or that if we accept that trans women are women, then what that does is reinforces what they'd think of as damaging gender stereotypes, because they say that if you think that someone can become a woman by identifying as a woman, then what you are doing is accepting that to be a woman is to act like a woman or to feel like a woman. And for them, that means that you are reducing womanhood to a certain behavior type or a certain feeling, which they think reduces womanhood to stereotypes fundamentally. And I mean, I don't agree with that particular analysis, but more to the point, because I think people have rights to their opinions, that this movement is often really quite nasty. So I remember we had a whole show on it actually with me and Ash and Sean Fay, where there'd been a Channel 4 documentary, a Channel 4 sort of show called Genderquake, and they'd invited a lot of TERFs to be in the audience. Incredibly irresponsible piece of programming. But there was Munro Bergdorf and Caitlyn Jenner on the panel. And, people in the audience were these TERFs in the audience were just sort of shouting penis, you've got a penis at these trans women. And it wasn't, a thoughtful conversation about whether or not, or, what conditions should be in rape crisis centres, et cetera, et cetera. It was just completely abusive and saying, you're men, it was uncontroversially transphobic. And many people who are trans within the Labour Party feel that this movement is gaining strength within the Labour Party and want people at the top of the party to stand up to it. I mean, what do you think about this? Yeah,
I think that there's obviously a need for an informed, amicable conversation about all range of things in regards to LGBT rights, party policy. That should be up for debate in a democratic party. But you're right, it does seem that, when I have these conversations sometimes on Twitter, I know, for instance, trans people who are a bit older who won't ever come out. They won't come out to their family, their friends, and they're miserable. And that is the average trans person in this country. They're not, 22 on Twitter. They're all ages, all colours, small business, unemployed, and they can't be themselves. They can't be happy. That's the first thing. Second thing is, we know, as you started out at the beginning of the section, we know, for instance, reported rates of self-harm, suicide. These are all far higher for trans people, right? We know that. Homicide in the US for trans black women, for instance, incredibly high, incredibly more likely, statistically significantly more likely to be subject to assault or whatever than a white woman or than a man. So that's an issue as well. And so, like you say, okay, well, let's have a conversation around, I don't really want to be in that conversation because I'm a cis het man, but you could say, well, there's a conversation to be had around toilets, things like that. Okay. But then immediately you get, they're men, penis. And you think, this doesn't sound to me like you're coming at this from a good place, or rape crisis centres and how, or women's prisons, by the way, an incredibly small issue. I mean, the number of women incarcerated in this country is tiny.
But then you should be able to have a completely pragmatic question about, how do you respect
Of course.
everyone's rights in a way where you're not screaming man at transgender women.
But that's not the reality of trans issues, trans politics in this country are that, hundreds of thousands of people, very likely, aren't able to lead lives of dignity, aren't able to access certain resources, aren't basically, they're not treated equally under the law to other people. Now, that clearly is at odds with progressive politics. And to go from that and this mass phenomenon which affects hundreds of thousands of people, possibly, we don't know the exact numbers, to go from that to then talk about, 100 people, I don't know how many women are in prison in the United Kingdom, it's in the hundreds, right?
Really?
Yeah, it's really low. In category A prisons, in sort of serious crime prisons, it's very, very low. I mean, somebody can put it in the comments. But basically, I think it shows a kind of a desire not to engage in the politics of it. I personally think trans women are women. Trans women aren't cis women, right? That's a separate category. You're right. But that doesn't mean they're men. And so you have a conversation about this with somebody, go, okay, well, what's a woman? Somebody can have children. Okay, well, what if a woman can't have a child? What if she's incapable of having children? Does that mean that she's not a woman? Well, and then you can talk about all matter of things. Well, what about an intersex person? Okay, well, what about somebody who's born a man, has transitioned, has estrogen, yada, yada, yada? What if one day, speculatively, probably quite likely, somebody who's born a man could transition and even have the capacity to reproduce and have children, have a womb, etc.? Where's the definition here? Are they less of a woman, according to your own definition, than a woman born a woman who can't have children? And so clearly it's a very arbitrary thing, but there is a complete absence of wanting to discuss these things properly amongst TERFs. So I really do have my misgivings about how sincere they are.
I mean, I think probably on the whole, the left do need to get better at discussing this, because I think it often does feel like you're walking on eggshells. I for example, feel like the debate about self-ID can be quite confusing, and I think one reason why you've got the TERFs on this side who just tend to seem to me to be quite unpleasant people, who just don't think that trans women are women. And then I think you have many people in the middle who think trans women are women, but it's the idea of self-ID is kind of confusing, because you're not a woman by saying you're a woman. And the way I think about this, the way I sort of came to terms with how to understand this, is that you don't become gay by saying you're gay. You're gay by being attracted to people of the same sex or sleeping with people of the same sex. But what's the best way to find out if someone's gay?
But even then, that's arbitrary, isn't it?
Because you ask them.
Yeah, that's true.
So I'm not gay because I self-identify as gay. But what's the best way for you to find out if I'm gay? It's not to demand that I show you a picture of me having sex with a man. It's to ask me. And if you've got no reason to disbelieve me, then you should probably work on the assumption that I'm gay.
It's a puerile. If you were to say, okay, well, let's say you're attracted to men, but you've never had sex with them, are you gay? I mean, somebody go, this is a childish puerile conversation. How ridiculous.
And it's kind of similar with this.
Yeah, that's the exact state of the debate when it comes to trans rights. At the very in some cases, at the very highest level of this country's kind of public conversation. Like you said on Channel 4, Genderquake.
Let's talk about, let's do it before. We're going to talk about Keir's pledges first of all. We're just going to look at where, this skepticism towards trans rights can lead some people. This is a tweet from Paul Embry, which rightly got a lot of beef. He's a columnist at Unheard. He was,
or as we like to call it, Unread.
Unread. He was a columnist he was an official at the FBU, but then he, I think, got suspended. He said, the Labour Party should introduce the equivalent of a swear box on any occasion between now and the next election. An MP or activist mentions climate change, human rights, Palestine, gender identity, LGBT rights, or migrant rights. They should be fined. I'm only half joking. This is utter nonsense.
It's bizarre.
I mean, one reason it's bizarre is because, he's saying you're going to lose an election if you talk about these things. But if no one on the left, these are all very different things.
We definitely need to talk about climate change.
And trans rights are very different things.
Even if you're not a racist TERF, we definitely need to talk about climate change.
But at the same time, what it completely underestimates or ignores is the fact that even if the left have an opinion at the moment which is out of kilter with key sections of the electorate which they need to get into government. By campaigning on stuff, the left can change people's minds. If we just leave the field on LGBT rights and climate change and Palestine, then the country's going to be in a much worse place in 5 years' time, and we're not going to be in a stronger place for the Labour Party to win an election.
Can you imagine Paul Embry? It's the when was Galileo around and Copernicus, 16th century. And you go, Paul, the Earth is not flat, it's round, and we're not at the centre of the universe. We're merely one planet orbiting one particular star amongst many, many, many stars. Paul go, oh, that's not going to go down well with the papacy. Fuck me. I mean, this is literally the definition of reactionary politics. I don't care if it goes down with the paper. It's inaccurate. It's not true. And so if you care about progressive politics, the answer is yes, we need a response on all these things. And also, particularly with Labour, for somebody who claims to be so serious about the left as a force of government, if you're a single issue campaigner, and you go, look, I haven't got the time, I haven't got the mental bandwidth to deal with all these things. I get that. You got that with a lot of pro-EU people, right? I don't care about Palestine. They'd say that. I understand that. But if you're serious about being a Labour Party activist, wanting Labour to form a government, they're going to have a political position on all of these things. Because guess what? You're the government.
We're going to move on to Keir Starmer's pledges in a moment. But first of all, I just want to continue with that analogy, actually, about Copernicus and whether or not, that was your analogy, right? Whether the
heliocentric,
whether the Earth is the center of the universe or whether the Earth moves around other suns and the universe doesn't revolve around us. So if you were, obviously there wasn't mass democracy in that time and that place, but if you were a Labour Party when that was a debate being had, you should have a position which is that the Earth isn't at the center of the universe. At the same time, you shouldn't expel people who think that the Earth isn't the center of the universe, because you want to build a coalition. You're going to have to try and appeal to people who think that the Earth is at the center of the universe. At the same time, if there were people who were organizing to try and victimize and exclude and burn at the stake potentially anyone who did think that the Earth wasn't at the center of the universe, they're the people you probably should exclude and expel. And I think you probably can take the same argument
absolutely
to this debate here, which is that obviously if someone has a different opinion about sex and gender identity, we shouldn't be excluding people from a party based on what beliefs they have. It would be McCarthyite, and it would be unhelpful because we're trying to build coalitions here. But if there are a group of people who are organizing to try and exclude a group of people because of immutable characteristics, or exclude them because they live a life that that we as a party would decided is perfectly valid and should be facilitated, then that's when you have a disciplinary problem. It's the organising against other people that's the problem.
What you're basically saying is that some of these organisations are an embryonic Spanish Inquisition, and we shouldn't let them get that far.
Yeah. Well, but they'd probably call Rebecca Long Bailey the Spanish Inquisition for having signed up to these pledges. Anyway, let's move on. We could go down a rabbit hole here. We're going to go to Keir Starmer's 10 pledges. There's loads of them. So which do you want to pick? Do you want to pick some that you thought were particularly?
I think they're all they're interesting because you've got economic justice, social justice. Basically at the start it's more thrill, at the end it's more fill. So they're like, okay, let's get 10. Economic justice talks about increasing top rate of tax, top 5% of earners paying more tax. Talks about returning the rate of corporation tax back to what it was from before the Tories took power. So that would mean it would go up in reality from present 19% to 28%. Remember, Jeremy Corbyn in the last general election was promising to raise it to 26%. So if this is what Starmer means, Starmer's actually out-Corbyning Corbyn. Social justice, abolish universal credit, end sanctions regime, set a national goal for well-being to make health as important as GDP, stand up for universal services, defend the NHS, abolish tuition fees.
That's a big one.
That's a really big one. Put the Green New Deal at the heart of everything we do. Although what was interesting is he doesn't actually give a firm date for decarbonisation, which would have been useful. Promote peace and human rights. That's really sort of upset a lot of Blairites like John Rentoul. No more illegal wars. Apparently this is kind of a bottom. You can't say that. Introduce Prevention of Military Intervention Act and human rights at the heart of UK foreign policy. Common ownership. Public services should be in public hands, not making profits for shareholders. Support common ownership of rail, mail, energy and water. End outsourcing in the NHS. Then it gets a bit kind of more weaker. Okay, you're like, this is a really impressive policy offer. Defend migrants' rights, full voting rights for EU nationals. We knew that already. Defend free movement as we leave the EU. In the context of a Tory majority of 80, what does that mean? Go on.
I think what that means. So defend free movement as we leave the EU. And I think this would...
Because that's not about the next general election,
Well, to be honest, that would be a sensible position for the Labour Party. So I think that what the Labour Party can do is there's going to be a Tory Brexit position, which is going to go through the Commons, and there's going to be a new immigration system which goes through the Commons, and the Labour Party are going to have a choice as to whether they support it or oppose it. And I think they can oppose it on the basis that it reduces the rights of...
Sure.
Of it. What the Labour Party don't want to do is ever consent to
No.
a lowering of the rights of migrants. But when you come to the election in 2024, we're in a new context. That's,
Yeah, you've clarified that.
Reintroducing freedom of movement is just one of many ways that we could increase migrant rights, and why would we necessarily commit to that?
Yeah, I mean, the rest of it is explicitly sort of oriented towards the 2024 election, if that's when it is, whereas that is less so. That's fair enough, actually. Strengthen workers' rights and trade unions, repealing the Trade Union Act, radical devolution of power, wealth, opportunity, federal system to devolve powers, regional investment banks, which is a big one, again, from Corbyn, McDonnell, to have control over regional industrial strategy, abolish the House of Lords. I mean, there's not much of an offer there for Scotland, I don't think. And then finally, and then we get, now we're getting to kind of real, like I say, more fill than thrill. Equality, pull down obstacles that limit opportunities and talent. We are the party of the Equal Pay Act, shall start, BAME representation, and the abolish. That's not a policy proposal. That's just rhetoric about.
We must build on that for a new decade. That is real. That they phoned that one in, didn't they?
That is just.
It's like we need a BAME LGBT one. We'll build on it. It's not an offer. In any case,
Are Labour the party of BAME representation? I mean, that's quite questionable. I mean,
I think proportionally, yes. If you look at Parliament,
in the last 25, yes, since the mid 1980s. I mean, but no, I mean, all parties have been part of racist policies, and well, since the 1920s, but more recently too. I don't buy the argument that Labour's this historically anti-racist party. I think it probably only becomes an explicitly anti-racist party under Corbyn, anti-racist. And then finally, equality, effective opposition to the Tories, forensic, effective opposition to the Tories in Parliament.
Oh, no one wants forensic opposition. Oh,
no, but he's like giving this is like treats to the kind of melts, right? Linked, here you go. This will cheer you up. Linked up to our mass membership and a professional election operation. And then this is what I like here. This is important. Never lose sight of the votes lent to the Tories in 2019. Now, that's interesting because if he's going to have that humility with regards to Labour membership, you've lent me your votes. I think a lot of people on the left would like that because that's exactly how they feel with him, right? There's not many people on the left who go, Keir Starmer, he's absolutely my guy. I've got no questions asked. But they're like, I think he's the best bet. At this particular moment, I'm going to back him. But I think that rhetoric of lending votes would help him.
I'm not sure it would because I think the people that you're describing are probably voting for Rebecca Long-Bailey, and I think those are people who think Rebecca Long-Bailey's is my politics, but I'm going to tolerate Keir Starmer, right? Because I actually think that probably
he needs to win those people over, doesn't he? That's
potentially
the
in the wider membership, there are a lot of people who see Keir Starmer as representing their politics because they're potentially less ideological than many of the people who are more involved. I mean, the context here really is that what Keir Starmer's offer was that he will retain the best of Corbynism without Corbyn, with someone who's knighted, with someone who will be, this is the idea, appeal to people across the country because he's risen to the top of his field. He's not seen as, he's not seen as a risk because he's so deeply ingrained in the establishment that he's a safe pair of hands.
That's a really good argument.
He was head of the department, not department. He was director of public prosecution.
CPS,
sorry. Head of CPS, and he was DPP, head of the Crown Prosecution Service, which makes you the director of public prosecutions. So that's the offer. He can keep all the best of Corbynism with a more acceptable face, which will bring in a broader selection of the electorate. The worry is, and I've got no reason to think that's not what he's planning, right? I don't know. I can't read his mind. The worry is that unless he is willing to take on the establishment within the Labour Party and within the media and, within Britain, he's not going to be able to keep to these promises because there's going to be a huge, huge pressure on him to dump them all. And as we've often discussed on this show, it will be within his power to dump them. Once you're a leader of the Labour Party, it's very easy to dump policies that you don't like.
But then why say it? Because he's probably getting over the line as it is on second preferences anyway. Worst case scenario, right? At this stage, he might have a terrible night tonight and, there's still a long way to go. So why has he done it? Why? Because what we were saying last week is, he'll say as little as possible because, not because he doesn't even necessarily, he might agree with it, But ultimately, he needs to act in a politically expedient way when he's leader of the party, which this is kind of at odds with, isn't it? Why
Well,
say
except that some of it's quite, so as you say, like the climate stuff is quite vague.
Tuition fees,
support-
public ownership, tax. I mean, these are things that the Labour right aren't going to agree
Common
with.
ownership of water, the Labour right are going to hate that. Abolishing tuition fees, the Labour right are going to hate that. I mean, I suppose this is basically his starting pitch. And then there's going to be people trying to pull it to the left who are going to fail. And there are going to be people trying to pull it to the right who have a much greater chance of succeeding. But anyway, that's what I want to ask him. That's why Keir Starmer should come on the show so we can talk about what is his strategy for sticking with the principles he says he supports.
But I think the reason why it's come out today, and we had the first debate tonight, it's at 10:30 on the BBC, is that what Rebecca Long-Bailey's people, their strategy is, and they're not going to attack Keir Starmer personally or on his Brexit record. You might think they should. I think his flip-flopping on Brexit is quite poor, shows poor political judgment. His flip-flopping over the 2016 coup shows poor political judgment. Backing Owen Smith, in his own words, 100%, really. Rather than attack him on those points, they say, look, well, we want to basically differentiate ourselves on policy. Him releasing this today, the day of the first kind of publicly televised debate, shows, he needs to differentiate himself from the Labour right on policy. So it's a very smart thing to do. And I think, if anything, this is probably what will win it for him, all things being equal. But what worries me is the preface to this. It's him saying, this is based on the moral case for socialism. Here is where I stand. Is there a moral case for public ownership of water? No, it's rigged. It's a really bad, in Trump speech, it's a bad deal. Or industrial policy. Is there a moral case for a more interventionist industrial policy? Not really.
It's practical, isn't it?
Neoliberalism just doesn't really work anymore. We've had GDP per capita, that's GDP, all the economic kind of goods and services in circulation for a year, divided by all the people in this country, basically hasn't moved for 13 years. Measured in dollars, it's actually gone down. So the idea of talking about this moral case, you just need to say, our system is broken and it only works for a certain group of people. And that's a really populist line, but also you can say, I want to modernise the British economy.
I mean, I suppose
like Wilson did. This is like the worst for me, sorry. This is like the worst bit of Corbynism, the moral case for socialism. This is like the one bit of Corbynism I don't want you to keep.
I suppose you could say another worry about Keir Starmer is that, well, his offer seems to be, I'm competent and a nice guy. And I'm not sure how often that's been, he hasn't really offered a vision for the country. He doesn't seem to be a visionary, right? So how often have you had a successful politician who's become prime minister on the basis of being a competent, nice guy? I don't know. That doesn't necessarily seem to me like a winning combination.
Well, they always point to Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand. She came second in the 2017 New Zealand elections. This is like, she's the idol for the centre in this country. She came second. In a majoritarian system like ours, she would have been like Corbyn. She would have been, they have a PR-based system and they're now in a coalition government with a right-wing party.
I suppose in coalition politics, being a competent person who's also a nice person
is
probably
works there.
Quite good. When
in a majoritarian
system,
system,
maybe less so.
It doesn't work.
We're going to go to your questions. We've been on for an hour, so we're going to be super quick with your questions. First of all, we've got mixed feelings about Keir Starmer's pledges. Some Labour MPs feel actually quite strongly about it. So this is an anonymous Labour MP texting Kevin Schofield. We've never quite learned if this is more than one person because he tweets the same formulation most days. He says, the anonymous Labour MP says, text to Kevin, those pledges have really put me off. I think he thought he had the moderates in the bag as we have nowhere else to go, so can pivot to the left. I may now spoil my ballot. Well, it's one member, one vote. As we've said, there are 800,000 voters. So anonymous Labour MP, you can wipe your ass with your ballot paper. It's not going to make any difference to the outcome of this election. Have we got any questions now? Let's have a look through them.
I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? It's also like, that's absolutely correct. 2/3 of the Labour Party's MPs are completely at odds politically with the membership. That's absolutely correct. You in no way represent the membership more broadly. Actually, you don't really represent the sort of centre of public opinion. Boris Johnson talking about, more money going to local bus services, the way they triangulated, or the stuff on, hospital parking charges. that's to the left of where Progress were 2 years ago. So it's not even like, we're the pragmatic people. In many cases, they're just more right-wing than the average person.
Absolutely. Right. Oblix 101 asks, if Bernie wins the nomination and then beats Trump and becomes the president, what does it mean for the left here in Great Britain? Will we see a surge in confidence in the left being electable? Yes. I mean, if that happens, I think some people will like kick themselves that they didn't elect Rebecca Long Bailey. Other people, well, in any case, it's always net positive. One problem, one thing that could happen is that people will think, oh, we should have elected Rebecca Long Bailey. We should have had the confidence to do that. The other thing that might happen is Keir Starmer will be the leader of the Labour Party, and he will have the confidence to offer a genuinely left-wing program. Because I mean, one of the reasons why Ed Miliband, shifted to the right so endlessly to the point where he had no position at all is because he had so little confidence in left-wing politics, even if he wanted to be more left-wing. Well, he always says he wishes he could have been more left-wing. The argument for Starmer is that he'll have the confidence to be as left-wing as Ed Miliband wanted to be. And if Bernie wins, that would obviously be intensified. Luke Liebor asks, if Bernie loses on the back of Corbyn losing, will it have the opposite effect? Yes. I mean, it will, right?
What if Bernie loses the nomination or the presidential race?
The president's race, the presidency.
Plausibly. I mean, the thing is, I would have Trump the favourite against, despite the present polling, I'd have Trump the favourite against any of them. Firstly, because incumbents tend to get re-elected. Then secondly, if you look at the numbers on Trump's Republican primaries, the actual turnouts for an incumbent, so you're still having to go through a party primary. Obama had to do it in 2012, Trump's having to do it now with the Republican Party. His numbers are really high. His base has never been more happy. His public opinion ratings have never been his personal approval ratings have never been, higher. The economy is doing quite well in terms of sort of GDP growth, wage growth, etc. So it's a challenge for anybody.
Yeah, I mean, it's not that people should give up on the left-wing politics if Bernie Sanders and Corbyn, after Corbyn also loses, but I mean, it will be a damage to confidence. I mean, what's interesting here is that, and I hope he doesn't lose, I think he's probably the person with the best chance of beating Donald Trump. Very confident in that, in fact. But there is, what has changed since before the financial crisis is that centrists are no longer dominant and the left are resurgent. But the left hasn't yet proven that it can, the left is now competitive, which is different from 10 years ago. The left is competitive and the center is much, less dominant than it was. But we're still in this, mid-period where even though the left is very competitive, it's still yet really to prove that it can successfully win majorities.
There's a few places,
Where?
but they are few and far between. I mean, Syriza in 2015 is the first example, and then you'd have the Oki vote, which was the most, for me, was of all the populist sort of manifestations of, oh wow, there's like a hegemonic vote, was the Oki vote, which obviously then Syriza screwed up. Syriza, they probably had no option. No, but I'm saying this
also in that situation, Greece was in a sort of 20% recession imposed by a neoliberal institution.
It was a left-wing party completely grabbing the national popular moment, which hasn't really happened anywhere else. Spain, to a lesser extent, with Podemos and
that's
in the PSOE.
In PR systems, I think you'll see loads and loads of radical left parties enter government, and I think Bernie can beat Donald Trump. What I'm saying is that the question.
No, those are my two examples.
The question which still hasn't been answered is, barring a 20% recession imposed by the IMF, can the radical left win in a first past the post system? I mean, I think they can. Otherwise, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing. But
I'd say also Jose Manuel Obrador in Mexico, who was the left wing candidate. He's very much a Bernie Sanders style politician. So it is happening. Although. The context is, and this is the thing, what you're saying, well, what we've seen over the last, since 2008, increasingly as the left can't necessarily take that leadership position, is that actually there's far more resistance to that happening than we probably assumed. I never thought that establishment Democrats would rather Trump win than Sanders. But those people do exist. I'm not saying it's most of them, but they do exist.
I think there'll be, well, just as there were many, many, many Labour MPs who wanted Jeremy, who were distraught that Jeremy Corbyn did well in the 2017 election and were relieved, joyous that Boris Johnson became Prime Minister in 2019 because they saw that as their opportunity to rid the party of Corbynism. There will be, I guarantee, I promise, potentially a majority of the Democratic establishment in the United States who want Bernie Sanders to lose to Trump because they think that's their opportunity to get back the party. It's yet to be seen to what extent the Democratic establishment are able to undermine Bernie Sanders to the extent that the Labour Party establishment were able to undermine Jeremy Corbyn. We've talked about this before because of the different political systems. It's not a parliamentary system there, so the establishment have less power, but that's yet to be seen.
One of the comments, Sinn Féin. They came first.
Yeah, but they didn't. Again, PR system, 24%.
Yeah.
We know the right.
Although actually, no. But actually, we haven't seen the exact data on this, but actually, they came first in a lot of regions. So if it was a first past the post system, actually that 24% still would have been quite a good showing.
Yeah, but if it was Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael sort of combined got the.
The point is they beat them the most. Even if I know what you're saying, it may be completely undemocratic. You can also win majorities.
Yeah.
Labour won a huge majority with 35% of the vote.
I suppose what I'm saying is you can't impose a different electoral system on an electoral result because people vote according to the electoral system.
No, but I think Sinn Féin. I think Sinn Féin doing that. You've got whispers of it. The Green Left in Iceland. But I agree with you. Nobody in a major country bar Mexico has done it successfully.
In any case, let's wrap up. Stuart asks, any more leadership interviews arranged? We have Angela Rayner on towards the end of March. We'll obviously tweet out the exact date soon. And finally, Ricky Leach on the Super Chat gives us 20 Canadian dollars. We'll have to look at the conversion rate afterwards, but thank you anyway. I mean, thank you. But we'll just have to see how profitable that will be when we do the conversion rate afterwards.
I say?
Ricky Leach has said that is for starting on time. I just want to say the reason we start on time now is because Fox, our new producer for Tisky Sour, has really disciplined me and Aaron. So this is why the ship is so tight these days. So say hi to Fox in the comments. Aaron, you wanted to?
I want to say, look, we've
something?
got 1,363 people watching, only 483 thumbs. Hit the thumb button. Let's get 1,000 before the end of the show. That's a really, really tough ask, but we often do get 1,000 now. By the end of the show, and of course, hit the subscribe button. It doesn't cost you anything. Of course, if you want to spend money, you go to support.novaramedia.com. But if you don't want to spend money, you can do those two things.
We are back tomorrow with Len McCluskey. Big interview. Someone said, where's Laura Pidcock tonight? We were going to have Laura Pidcock tonight, but she had to cancel for personal reasons, which is a shame. We'll get her back on soon. In any case, this was Tisky Sour. I'm Michael Walker. This is Aaron Bastani. Good night.